Peace and love, everyone. This is Ross Ben coming with episode 9.5 of Mystics from the 40th Parallel. Because after episode 9, man, I was so, my mind couldn't stop reflecting on it. And right, I gave Mike some immediate feedback about my thoughts on Queen Esther. But when I thought about it, I was like, man, Queen Esther might be the key to several mysteries that have crossed our journey, as we exploring the mysteries of the 40th parallel. One, Queen Esther may be the new queen of Pennsylvania and the nation's necrogeomancy. We'll talk about what that means. Queen Esther may be tied in with the Chautauqua movement somehow, because that Chautauqua movement, which seems to be what we would say the Rosicrucian Invisible College manifested as in the early development of the country, and that Chautauqua was an Iroquois term. Its roots lay in that land up in New York, that Finger Lakes region. So that's something else, we need to penetrate. And I also think Queen Esther and that Bloody Rock ritual, I'm not going to call it a massacre, I think it was a ritual, it may be tied in with baseball. And the ritual of, knocking a home run out the park. So I asked Mike, hey, Mike, let's come together and do a 9.5, man. And I really appreciate that he's given up some time on his, valuable Saturn's Day, right? To chop it up with me on this. What's your thoughts, Mike?
So I think you're opening up a lot of doors which I've looked at before, but not necessarily gone so far deep down. And I think that's one of the real values of these conversations, is because, like, when I do my research on my own, when you do your research on your own, and so forth, it's like, sometimes you don't go down certain pathways, but when someone else sees the same thing, they're like, hey, maybe we should explore that. Like, there's that confirmation. And so everything what you're hitting at is it complements deeply some of the thoughts which I have had in the past. So I want to pull up like maybe some of the old slides which I have looked like I put out in place years ago, and looking at it with this new light with where you're going to go. But I want to step back for a moment and allow you to continue down where you're going with this setup of this conversation.
All right. I am going to revisit the presentation that we shared episode 9 to talk about the new queen. So remember, we decoded the Queen Goddess Winona statue at Eakins Oval. It's really technically it's the George Washington equestrian statue. And this was the queen that holds the keys to the greatest mystery of Philadelphia, Lenape-Hoken, that it was a part of a transatlantic empire embodied by the trident, and she held a cornucopia overflowing, representing this abundance of the land. And on the inverse side, you got this new queen who, if I could decode it properly, Columbia, the new queen, the goddess of war, and war memorialization, which those that are familiar with my Free Your Mind and Your Mind Will Follow book and works, this is like necrogeomancy. This is occupying mounds. This is taking a mound that may have been an indigenous burial ground for thousands of years, spilling blood of your patriotic line into that mound, and then building a war memorial on top of that mound to necrogeomantically occupy and take control of that mound. So this queen, this new queen, Columbia, she embodies that. In one hand, she has two flagpoles, which means I'm planting several flagpoles. I'm making many memorials. She's flanked by the dead burying the dead. A dying man with a rifle, and then on this side, a dead man with a shovel. Something else I want to point out that she another significant clue that she's about sacrifice. She holds the sword by the blade, which means, you know, she's shedding her own blood. She's not holding the sword by the handle. If you hold the sword by the blade, you're going to cut your own hand, you know? So her blood, this is all about, again, shedding this blood of what we would call US compatriots into the mounds to occupy the mounds. So when we reflect on the story you shared of Queen Esther, man, it sounds like that's exactly what she did at uh, Queen Esther's Bloody Rock. You
Mm-hmm.
know, she well, someone, right? It's attributed to her, but someone sacrificed, what was it, 14 soldiers?
I've read a couple different numbers, but anywhere from 14 to 30.
14 to 30, okay. Uh, 14 soldiers on this rock with a mallet busting their head open. And that's where the baseball symbolism may come in. Oh, and before I go there though, you said this ritual occurred both along the Susquehanna, right? As
Mhm.
well as by Spanish Hill, right? And was I
Is
correct with that?
downriver like that. That's all Queen Esther's territory is like,
All cool. So there is a mound and the Susquehanna connected to the ritual.
without a doubt, like in the mound of Spanish Hill. Like we don't even know what that is. Like I've not seen it with my own eyes. And the pictures I see of it, I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. But like by the readings, which are by reading what has been written about it, like obviously I think something is being missed with my own eyes. Like it's something you got to see it to really appreciate it, because both geologists, historians, like everyone recognizes like there's something up with that mound.
Wow. When I was doing my research for Free Your Mound and Your Mind Will Follow, that particular mound, lore of it did come up in terms of Pennsylvania mounds.
Spanish Hill.
Spanish Hill, yeah. This guy who did a survey of the mounds throughout the country, his name is escaping me, but he dedicated several chapters to Spanish Hill.
Wow.
For some reason, I'm gonna follow up with him. I'm gonna get that receipt, and next time, we talk about this.
And that's exactly what I'm talking about. It in the fact that, like, there are all these clues. Like, if that got several chapters in like a book about
Not
all the
chapters, I'm
mounds,
sorry, paragraphs.
paragraphs.
Yeah.
Chapter, but
Exactly.
like we see, it's like it's constantly being mentioned, but like it's kind of in the background. And I'm like, there's something more there. There's definitely some,
Absolutely.
like, it's a very significant site.
Absolutely. But I wanted to bring that up in the context of the next thing I think is connected with Queen Esther, and this may be baseball. That baseball may be, as a game, designed to ritualistically reenact this Queen Esther's Bloody Rock ritual, because it involves uh, a, a, a ball or a head being hit on top of a squared rock, which kind of corresponds to a diamond, right? A baseball diamond. The head could correspond to the baseball, and the mallet that she used correspond to the baseball bat, and how baseball is America's pastime, and right, it's ritualistically tied to the Susquehanna with the Baseball Hall of Fame being there. It's just it made me ponder, you know. Uh, so I wanted to throw those things out there, man. Get your thoughts on it.
All right, all right, all right. I wanna throw some a little bit more information. Can you give me screen share
I sure, yeah, I'm
capability?
gonna take mine off.
All right. And I
Open
think
it up.
I need permission.
All right, and that would be and uh there we go.
All right, all right. So where to begin? I want to, well, first I'm going to just go and this, like, as you said, this is what popped in my mind is, so there was, just thrown out there. So there was a movie, 1992, about the girls' professional baseball league. And the reason I want to point that out is, like, you know, who was one of the stars in that, but Madonna. And we talk about Madonna specifically as Queen Esther. So, you know, in the synchronistic aspect of popular culture, we see, like, you know, in the film industry, yes. So there is that link. But now I want to go back to some of this stuff. So a lot of my research, I did a whole thing just about, like, you know, goddess symbology with the Susquehanna River. But, you know, we can swap out the word goddess for queen. You know, I was looking at it from that perspective. I think it's kind of interchangeable.
Absolutely.
And and it all begins with this John Smith map of Virginia. And this character right here, in my opinion, is like, this is what this is primarily about. Why do I say that? Because if this is a map, you know, this is all like very, very dense to look at, all of this detail, even this image right here. But this is, there's nothing kind of in the backdrop. Like, it's very clear that this is where the eye is to go. And this is a Susquehannock warrior, and it says beneath the feet. And I mentioned this in our conversation, the Susquehannocks are a giant-like people. So the first thing I'll just point out is, like, this is a, you know, this is a common baseball position, right? We've got this, you know, we've got the leaning on the bat. And we're going to go back and look at this, where the Susquehannock warrior, where this image comes from. It comes from, you know, this image is the map of Virginia, which was published in 1612, which, you know, I can't say with 100% certainty, but I think it's a very, very solid conclusion, is Francis Bacon's the guy who's behind this. The final touches upon this move, it came through London. It came through the Virginia Company of London, in which Bacon was the chief on their executive council, and it was published like 1 year after Bacon released the King James Bible. So, like, after the King James Bible, he put his hands on this map and all the steganography which is in there. But let's go back to where this image begins. This image is quite evident, the third iteration of this original image, which comes from John White in 1585. And so this is the lost colony of Roanoke. This is Mateo, I believe, is who this is. And Mateo was, I don't know if he was a chieftain or not. I think he was, but of the people that were living in what we now think of as the Outer Banks of North Carolina, which is where Roanoke Island was said to have been. So we get this image, and he was also supposedly baptized. So these guys come in from England, and they go and they baptize this guy. That's the story. He's the first guy who was baptized and given like an English name with this next advent of the beginning of the colonies in the latest iteration within North America. And so then the image was slightly altered a bit for this Theodore de Bry, and you can kind of go and see where it goes from. Both of these guys can be tied directly to Rosicrucianism and John Dee. Like, there's a very strong lineage. So then here's the third iteration. So we can see kind of where it comes from. And so the point I want to make right now are the changes. Like, look at how this has been changed. And so we can see it a little bit more so right here. This was the original face. And then this is the second face. We see the hair is up, all of these sort of things. And then we have the third face, which suddenly, in my opinion, this becomes much, much more, at least in the face, like it becomes more feminized. And I'm not saying this is exactly one and the same, but it's certainly similar to the way Venus is shown in this Botticelli, this famous Botticelli painting. But if there's like really any sort of, so you've got the expression right there, but then the second aspect is the hair. The hair was up in both of these, in these images, but in the third one, in the picture, in the image of the Susquehannock, which is probably the best known, these two images are lesser known. We see it with flowing hair. So the flowing hair was given again like this, which to me really supports this idea of this warrior, which we see right here. We see the warrior is also dressed in Masonic attire. It's a female. It's a she, but it's whether or not it's a trans person or whether it's like a encrypted version of a female. Nonetheless, we see that. And to kind of support this idea, which I'm putting out, is the very first minted coin done in the colonies is called the flowing hair dollar. And this here is of Liberty, of Columbia. And it is her without her Phrygian cap, without her triangular cap on, and she has her hair flowing down. And so we know that this idea of, particularly from a Masonic perspective, because this was done by, I forget the guy who did it, Robert Scott, he was a very, very prominent Freemason. He was the designer of this, that flowing hair, the goddess Liberty, the goddess Columbia, is tied into flowing hair. So now when we go back and we look at this came out in 1794. This is 1612. So this is 178 years before, whatever the math would be. And we can see there is a continuity. We see a continuity. I'll say a couple last things which are of interest. Like, we know that this is a wolf head, which is hanging from the neck, which has multiple implications. One of which is, the wolf head goes back to the cult of Isis. And then lastly is like right at the 40th parallel is where we find, and you and I went there, we drove through this. If you remember that bridge which we drove across the Columbia Bridge. And so we have Columbia right there. Here we have Columbia with her Phrygian cap. And we have Marianne with her, who is the French goddess of liberty, right around the same time as the French Revolution, as the American Revolution. Same characters are involved with instigating both. And I've always found this rather interesting, is like just north of Columbia is where we find Marietta. So we got Marianne and we've got Columbia all right there. I could keep on going with this, but I'm going to pause for right now and give you an opportunity to kind of reflect back on some of the points which I just brought up, so forth.
Well, I'm curious as to what you think about the baseball connection.
So the baseball connection has always been like kind of like for me, like it's been mysterious. It's undoubtedly tied into the Susquehanna River, and we get the name the Susquehanna from that John Smith map. Like that is when the river, prior to that, there were many, many names for the river. And then that river, this is the document which says, no, this is what we're all going to agree to call upon. So it comes through the John Smith hand. So So the Susquehanna River, it has those two elements with tied to baseball, one at the source location, right next to something which is known as Council Rock. Council Rock is located right where the river, or the lake, which then becomes the river, is found. And Council Rock is rather significant within the Iroquois Confederacy. So we've got that, and if you go and you look at the family who is responsible for the through establishing the Baseball Hall of Fame, is a very one. It was a very wealthy family, but also a very cryptic family. What's their last name? Clark, I believe, is the last name. Clarke. Same family which is behind the Dakota apartment building. This is 2 generations earlier. The Dakota building being where Rosemary's Baby was filmed, where John Lennon was assassinated. Like, you know, we're seeing like a family lineage of like buildings being ritual sites, if you will, even like, you know, destructive type of magic sort of rituals. So we see that, and throughout Cooperstown, there are a couple other things. I don't want to go down that right now, which also support that. But then also in the West Branch of the river is where we find the
Little League.
Is Little League. And baseball and Little League, they're all about sacrifice. So going to your point with, like, you know, holding the blade by the hand and the sacrifice that comes within it. Baseball is a very unique game in the fact that sacrifice is part of it. Like, you know, I'm going to sacrifice my hit, sacrifice fly.
Right.
And so that is like built into the symbology. The last connection, which I want to bring into baseball, which really supports where you're going with this, is the mainstream logic for Cooperstown being the home of baseball comes from Abner Doubleday. And Abner Doubleday became he was the president of the U.S. Theosophical Society, but prior to that, he was like the unsung hero of Gettysburg. And so if we look at Gettysburg as being one of these ritual, like soaking the earth, like this whole area with the blood, like, you know, we have that tie-in as well. And I talked about this a little bit on a couple episodes ago, like just the line of Gettysburg to some other like really kind of like human sacrifice sort of things that we're finding or in really like central Pennsylvania, you know, not necessarily known outside of central Pennsylvania, but all of the same sort of motifs keep coming up, which is sacrifice and blood, and then baseball. And like one of the things, this is one of the storylines which is put out as it relates to baseball, is baseball became popular right at the end of the Civil War. And if you look at all of the original owners of the original Major League Baseball teams, they were often like generals or officers within the war. So one of the thoughts has been put out there is like, you know, after the nation went through the physical and the psychological trauma of like an actual battle and bloodshed, that hey, we can go and play this game. You know, this is part of the mystic of games, you know, whether it's like the Aztec ball game or the ball games which were played out in the Levant, is like, you know, the battle which we see on the diamond or the court or whatever we want to call it, is a softer symbol of the actual battle which happens, but they're undoubtedly connected because they're all the generals. They're all like, you know, and so maybe that's cyclical, is like we take away the big battle, which has already happened, which we've already like spilled blood throughout, you know, Antietam and Bull Run and Gettysburg. And now we're like linking it within by name and by people and by activity right on this ancient river. And then it ties right back into what you're saying is like, you know, the bashing in of the brains of the colonists, or, you know, the people who are the sacrificial people right on the Susquehanna, right in Wilkes-Barre, right in, you know, the Scranton area, that whole section. This is like central Pennsylvania is like out in the woods to begin with, Pennsylvania sort of thing to begin with, and then the western branch, like really the area where we find from Spanish Hill all the way down to, let's say, to Wilkes-Barre. Like that's some of the most
remote,
the most remote of an already remote sort of area. So the baseball thing makes a lot of sense, and it's and you can look at it from all these different ways too. Like, you know, is it the softer version of like the ritual? And it's like, well, if you're gonna have a ritual, at least we're not killing people and we're just doing it symbolically. Or maybe, you know, this holds it down, holds it in place,
grounds it.
That's what I see.
Every fanatic cheer.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. I'll say this one last thing about baseball. So on there are three main parts. Let me go back to this. So there are three main. Where's my Susquehanna River map? All right. So here's the Susquehanna River, right? Right here's Cooperstown. Right here is Puxatawney, Pennsylvania. So this is the Groundhog's Day. This is Groundhog's Day. And then right here is, well, this is Jamestown, but what this is probably right now in modern times is best energetically, you know, just in regular world, what the biggest industry right here is, this is NATO headquarters, or the NATO headquarters of the Eastern United States. NATO, which is also known as OTAN, so we're dealing with like, you know, Scandinavian type of symbology, is OTAN is Odin, is headquartered in Brussels. But then in the United States, because NATO stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, this is the NATO headquarters, and San Diego is like the other NATO in the United States. But where I want to go with all of this is each one of these points has an annual celebration, secular celebration. We have the Groundhog's Day celebration, where the guys are all dressed in their like Master Mason attire, and that always happens on February 2nd, the midpoint between the winter solstice and the spring equinox. This is always I can't think of the traditional name for it off the top of my head right now. It's escaping me. But this is an ancient holiday, is the midpoint. NATO has their annual NATO Day celebration, which is always the weekend closest to May 1st. So it's a May Day celebration, which is the midpoint between the spring equinox and the summer solstice. And then Baseball Hall of Fame, they have their annual baseball induction ceremony, where like that's their busiest time of the year, where baseball fans throughout the United States make a pilgrimage up to Cooperstown to celebrate the latest inductions into this Hall of Fame, which feels very, very like ascended masters to me. And this always happens on the first weekend, or the closest, you know, Saturday to the 1st of August, or let's just say August 2nd, because August 2nd is another one of these sacred dates, the midpoint between the summer solstice and the autumnal equinox. Wow. So we have at each one of these 3 points, we have a secular celebration where all these people are coming and filling in with energy, and always in kind of like fun, joyful ways. You know, it's like this May Day celebration, though it's, you know, it's a war-based sort of thing. You've got like the Groundhog's Day, which is fun, but it still has like very, very strong like Masonic undertones. And then we've got like the Baseball Hall of Fame, and we've just talked about like, you know, what could baseball be? And so going back to your point of like the grounding, the continuous grounding of the holding in of this energy here. I've got a slide, I don't have it up here, but I called it a 400-year ritual, and beginning with the establishment of Jamestown and the conclusion on 400 years to the day of the opening of High Point Scenic Vista, the place we went, which is right on the river at the 40th parallel with the sun and the moon and all of that. That marks this 400-year ritual. 400 is a cycle from a Kabbalistic perspective, 400 breaths, 400 days, 400 years. And what we're seeing is throughout that time period, and this is my sense, this is Mike's personal opinion, is that whatever a river may be, whatever a river actually is, and, you know, I've got ideas, but I don't know for certain, but I certainly think that the natural world is much, much different than what we understand it to be, is that this, whatever this was, and my sense is, you know, a goddess is a very, very fair symbol of what a river truly is there had been a, you know, we're encapsulating, we're holding down this river with this particular, for what it would be without any sort of like Baal worship done upon it. Like, you know, this is what its true nature is. And we're forcing, and this is where all the Enochian magic comes in. We're forcing it to go against its will because we have the keys of the Enochian River. And so tying that all back to your point is like, you know, this Queen Esther symbol of like, you know, this is now the new symbol of whatever this may have been, whatever this actual body of water, whatever this actual river is it has been what's the word I'm looking for? Like, it's been transferred over through this ritual, tied in with blood, tied in with power, tied in with all of these different sort of behind the scenes trickery.
Very interesting, man. So another question I had, kind of related to Queen Esther and this whole idea of her being the new queen that they've, you know, built consent, basically, you know. Like, you say, well, why go through all of this? What's the point? You know, providence, you know, even nature having to honor and recognize and give consent to, you know, their will, more or less, right? I followed up trying to research the Montour family, right? And I will say, like, anagram of their name is definitely R Mount, right? Montour, R Mount. But I saw what you're saying, like, to try to get a clear idea of the lineage, who did what, very confusing. It was also very confusing to me that Esther had 3 husbands, all of whom were indigenous chiefs of different clans. 2 of them dying, very odd. But then the last one was a Muncie Lenape chief who I think died, and she actually became the new queen of the Muncie Lenape. Am I correct with that?
Wow.
Am I correct? I was trying to get clarity, but is that the right interpretation of her life?
I mean, you hit on the thing which I was asking, like, why are these women like, you know, there's a piece to the puzzle which is unknown, and that piece is like, what is about this particular female lineage, which is why I like tied it into like the Schuyler sisters. I'm like, who are these Schuyler sisters who are so, you know, this told in our history? But it's the same idea of like these Montour sisters. Like, what is it that they bring that is making them like, these are the wives of the chiefs? You know, why is that? And I don't have an answer. But then what you're saying, and I don't think I came to the conclusion, but it's fascinating for 2 reasons. One, in context for where where the story begins in Philadelphia for everything we know of Queen Winona, and then like, you know, tying that in. But so it's very complementary. But I want to go back to our conversation with Hood Mystic, because that on another show, and I think I talked about this a little bit with you once, is how that led into Muncie, Indiana. Is it Muncie, Indiana? I think it is. And I talked about that on another show. And Muncie, Indiana, having all sorts of strange, like Rockefeller connotations, and it was with this big sociological study which was done in the 1920s. But that's a name place named after the Delaware, the Muncie clan of the Delaware of the Lenape, as this is where they settled. And what's even more interesting, or, you know, I'm just kind of like going off my head right now with, like, they originally called Muncie, they called it, I think, Devil's Land or something like that. And the reason why they said that is because there was so much natural gas when the settlers first arrived, that, like, you know, fires would come out from underneath the earth, or it could be lit. So there was that. We know that the most significant battle, or one of the most tragic, if you want to use that words, battle sites within Gettysburg is known as the Devil's Den. And then going back to the High Point Scenic Vista, that is located in a place called Hellam. Known for the Hellam Hills, and Hellam got its original name because they called it hell. They said that it had this sulfur aroma, and like they thought it was hell. And there's a local lore within York County, Pennsylvania, which is where all of this is, and I want to say this is in like the early 1900s. There was a fire at a mental institution, which was right in the Hellam Hills, right in this hell, where they kept the doors locked when this fire broke out, to allow, like, because they didn't want the inmates getting out. And so they were all burned alive in hell. And then the ones that did escape, like all of the local townspeople, like tracked them down and killed them. You know, the story being is like, because these guys are nuts. And so, like, we don't want the nuts guys running around a neighborhood. So we're going to go and kill them. But nonetheless, we keep on having this kind of symbology of, like, you know, hell and devils and, like, you know, all of this kind of underworld sort of thing. And it keeps popping right back up.
Man. I just want to say too, just on this is, it's related, but kind of just a tangent, that I'm kind of amazed and in wonderment how the research that we do, you know, because we do have to tell the people, it's not like I call you up and say, yeah, Mike, this is what I'm going to present on. I'm going to cover ABC. Why don't you do 1, 2, 3? It's not like that. It's like I'm inspired to do some research. You're inspired to do some research. We might have a general topic, like we said, hey, let's focus on the queens, you know? I think that's what we did this last go round. But then the synchronicities and the alignment, man, it's just blowing me away. And I'm gonna use the, what were those rocks we went to?
The Conewago Falls.
Conewago Falls. Man, how you take me to Conewago Falls, and then I'm researching East Falls here in Philadelphia and find these parallels. But how all we said was we're going to research the queens. And it seems like both of our efforts ended up covering the two queens on that significant statue, Winona on one side, the new queen on the other. And I should point out that East Falls, remember, we say a big key to that area being like, hey, this is where the Indian Queen was, is the fact that there are these 3 streets, Queen Lane, Indian Queen Lane, and the New Queen Street. And from my research, I had identified a new queen, but it didn't have like a chronological continuity, just geographic, and that being that East Falls is where Grace Kelly is from.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I might have taught
Right,
you
you
this.
mentioned that. Yeah. I thought that was that was,
That
and I think these are going to, and where you're going to, I'm going to respond to what you're going to say, but it's going to be again very, very complimentary.
that yeah, Grace Kelly being the one person born in the United States that you could say has, official, like, you know, uh, a noble bloodline,
Mhm.
and that making her the new queen, and she coming from East Falls. But I think we, like, doing this synergistic research, we may have identified the chronological new queen, like the one in their mind. Hey, we're going to take out the old queen because she's not granting us the land that we want. And we're going to appoint this new queen because somehow she is facilitating us getting hold of the land.
Without a doubt, without a doubt. Two things. So Conewango Falls, and you're like, before I get into that, I remember when I first started doing this research 5, 6 years ago, and when I was like first getting into it, and just kind of keeping it to myself, is the first time I came across your work. And the first thing I came across your work was a YouTube video from the was it Free Your Mind? That was the
The Free Your Mind conference, yeah.
Yeah, and watching and listening to you, I can remember this. I can remember this very, very clearly. Like I was in my apartment in Marietta. I showed you those town Mariettas. I was living in Marietta at the time, and I'm listening to that. I was working on some art, and everything which you were saying was so complimentary to what I was researching, what I was uncovering, and I was like, I know that this is paralleled. I know that this was paralleled, and so that was very, very. That was very confirming to me to keep on going down the lines. And I knew that at some point, like our paths would cross. And then secondly, like listening to your other, some of your other presentations prior to us connecting, I kept on noticing, like, the areas which you would touch upon. You touched upon Benjamin Banneker, and you talked about Ellicott Mills. And I'm like, that's where I grew up. I went to high school in Ellicott City. I went on which was on 108, and which is funny. So you grew up in the District of Columbia. I grew up in Columbia, Maryland. All right. So it's like, District of Columbia is probably best known for any sort of school was Howard University. I went to Howard High School. So it's like, and then where I went to college was in Richmond, Virginia. And like you did all of the Richmond sort of stuff. So I'm like, seeing these parallels in these, this sort of stuff. So that being said, so like always, like, there is something, like whatever that is, like you and I are tapped into, I believe, like, however people
Similar source.
Yeah, we're tapped into this story from different perspectives, but from them, we each get a more whole perspective of what this viewpoint is. But now I want to go back to Conewango Falls. So Conewango Falls, if you recall, is when we were there, I pointed out we're like 2 miles away from 3 Mile Island. 3 Mile Island is quite literally located. It's located in the Susquehanna River. Like that is, where are my slides here? So I'm going to show you this real quick. Remind me to come back to that. So there's a very big correspondence between the Susquehanna and this river, the Seine, that goes through Paris. And Paris means for Isis. That's what Paris is all about. And the one of the big reasons why is because the Seine was originally called the Sequana. So it's called the Sequana. Here's Sequana right here, the goddess Sequana, the Seine, and all this sort of stuff. And then this is Statue of Liberty in the Seine right here. And then this is the Statue of Liberty in the Susquehanna right in Harrisburg, like, in all this sort of place. So like you've got all this sort of stuff that's fascinating. But let's go to 3 Mile Island. We're going to go to 3 Mile Island, which is located in the Susquehanna River. TMI, as it's known, it sounds it sounds phonetically, you know, of the Phoenicians, it sounds like Tiamat, Tiamai. Like it's not exactly the same, but like as you brought up in our last episode in 9.0, is like Queen Esther is a retelling of the Tiamat and Marmaduke story, Esther and Mordecai and Tiamat and Marduk. And so we've got TMI, which happens here. And TMI is filled with all sorts of weird stuff. Like the strangest thing is the fact that 2 weeks before the TMI incident, the movie The China Syndrome was released, which was all about like a nuclear meltdown, and it talks about Pennsylvania. So you got all of that. But the Tiamat story has like, you know, it's similar to like a nuclear meltdown, specifically in the fact that Tiamat turns the blood of her enemies to poison. And so that was like the supposed effects of the 3 Mile Island incident, which to me was another ritual. Like, you know, I don't know this for certain, but it seemingly makes sense to me. And there's a lot of research to suggest this is true, is that nothing ever happened at 3MI. Like it was like a made up story, like, but we propagated, like there was no like actual like release of anything, but nonetheless, it was a huge story, which then grounded in the story of Tiamat into the river again. And this one was in 1979. And interestingly enough, the burning of the Notre Dame Cathedral, which is a cathedral to Isis, which is on an island in the Sequana, it happened on the 40th anniversary of TMI.
Man.
And when you go and you see like these rituals, and it's like, you know, this like, you know, and it's the goddess and the queen and all this sort of stuff. And it's like, it's very, it's consistent and complex and confusing. That's kind of the best I got for it.
Yeah, and you got me in a weird position, man, because I'm feeling like, yo, I gotta go find and watch Frozen.
Frozen 2.
Frozen 2, right. You know, I can't remember the last Disney film I've watched, but yo,
when you see that, like, so why did I see it? I look at my own, like my natural life as the compass for my, like, for the mystical investigations. Like, I don't look for anything other than what presents itself on my front porch. And why do I say that? It's because at the end of the day, I'm a little bit lazy. I'm like, I'm going to wait for it to come to me. But once it comes, I'm going to research. And so it's like, you know, they're two young girls who live with me. And so they're like, you know, they are that Disney age. And so I look at, I would never watch, I would not look for Frozen 2 to watch for myself, but because it presented itself and because I understand the significance of Disney, it's like, I'm like, all right, I'm going to watch this with open eyes. And the fact that it was such a blockbuster, like, yeah, you look at how they present, like, it's fascinating. It's fascinating. I'll go one last thing with this, it's the story, the subtext, like if you could go and see, I guess it's not even subtext, it's part of the main plot of the two, like, it's a complex storyline because these girls are realizing that they come from two different lineages. So they are part of it. Like, you know, their DNA is connected to both, like, you know, the indigenous people and then, like, you know, the colonizers as it's presented in this. And so there's a conflict, like, who am I? What am I? Who do I support?
Queen Esther sounds like.
Exactly. And then, like, the coming to what is told in the story is the spirit of the river doesn't give a fuck about who was right or who was wrong. It just wants them to stop fighting.
Wow.
And that's what it was. It's like, guess what? You're both fighting right now. I don't care anymore. That's why I pulled away all my magic. That's what happens in it. And then, like, the girls discover who they are. And one of the girls, like, listens to the song of the river. To me, like, I believe that is the gift of humanity, and we don't understand that is the power of song. Like we have it to an extent. Like, you know, I understand the importance of song, but I'm like, I think that's still just scratching the surface, and we point to it. So that being said, within that movie, the actual human being who sings the song of the river is a pop star. I don't even know if you'd call her a pop star, because I don't think she's particularly like mainstream popular. Her name is Aurora. And I think she's probably best known for this song, which is called Running with the Wolves. And it's based upon, I don't know if you're familiar with this book. It's called The Women Who Run with the Wolves. And I believe it was written by Starfeather. I think that's her name. And so Starfeather is really, really an influential figure within the like the women reclaiming like what it is to be a woman movement. So the book, The Running with Women Who Run with the Wolves, is a direct connection with the same idea, though the context could be slightly different, of the woman in the wilderness. It's talking about that wild woman, like that archetype of being a woman. And so my sense is, and the reason I'm laying all this out is like, it's very confusing. Like Frozen 2 points to like the fact that, like, you know, we're kind of in a bind. We're talking about the situation of like, you know, we got this and we got that. And it's like, you know, we've been born into like a double bind situation. It's like, well, how do we, and when I say we, humanity, get ourselves out of this? And as you like to say, like fucking ball, you know, how do we get out of this situation? And to me, like that type of the rediscovery of this, like kind of like, for a woman, let's say, like that type of wild woman archetype, and then like in the equivalent of what it is for the man, like, you know, and how that connects. Like to me, that points to that understanding the natural world, like in a way which is different than what we think. Even us who think they're like, oh yeah, I know it's more than that. Like I think we're just touching the surface. Like that to me is inspiring, and that to me is like, that's how you get out of it. And that's kind of what Frozen 2 was ultimately about, is like, is like, it's all trash. It's all trash. We got to go back to basics.
Yeah, I gotta watch it, because even the part you were saying where ultimately the whole problem was this one river being dammed up, and what I've researched with what they call today the Schuylkill was the Manayunk, that dam that's by the Philadelphia Waterworks and Philadelphia Museum of Art. Energetically, that dam is creating the scarcity illusion.
Completely.
You know, the scarcity spell that everyone's under, that, you know, is like lack and scarcity. And you know, when you tie in all the abundance that it cut off, that we shared in episode 9, like reading about like why this was you know, where the queens met, because it was this cornucopia of abundance. And then you tie it into the reality that the Philadelphia Waterworks was the first utility. This was the first utility, the idea that you're going to take a natural resource that, you know, prior to the creation of this utility, this resource was free and accessible to all without cost, you know? And now you're going to turn it into a utility where, right, it's a natural resource, but you got to pay for it.
Yeah.
That's the history of the Philadelphia Waterworks.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, and it's in a lot of ways, it's just, it's that simple. Like that's where it begins. Something that was once free, like there was a lot of effort to create like the building that infrastructure, so then they can start to say like, you got to pay. And then as soon as that began, well, then the cycle of, well, now you need money to survive. And now we're like so many generations deep into it, like it's beyond the mind, the mindset of so many people to think like that you have, yeah, of course you need money. You got to pay rent. You got to pay your mortgage. You got to pay for this. Like shit ain't free. And it's so deeply ingrained. And it's like no. And I found it so friggin' inspiring when and we talked about that, like, you know, the abundance of what North America was. And I've talked to a lot of people, my friends, like, you know, after we had that conversation about like, why did they write that the smell of North America was so so noteworthy that they put it down? Why didn't Europe smell like that? Why didn't the Mediterranean smell like that? Like, what was different? They didn't have factories back then. It shouldn't have stunk. Like, what did North America have? What was that? And so thinking about this is truly that land of like abundance in the greatest sort of way. Yeah, like that makes so much sense. Like, I'm not telling people to go and undam all the rivers and destroy all the dams, but like, you know.
I would say if there's one to do, it would be that one right there.
I would agree with that.
Because it's not even you know, it's not doing anything as far as like the infrastructure or, you know, the waterworks that it was built for was defunct long time ago. It's just a artifact of a once active utility, you know. So we'll see, man.
The other thing about Schuylkill, if I recall, it's been a while since I did a whole bunch of research on the Schuylkill years ago. And so if my memory is correct, and Schuylkill's a Dutch word, and I believe it means hidden.
Yes.
So it's like hidden, esoteric, like all these implications.
You're absolutely right.
And the Schuylkill's got a weird feel to it. Like it's creepy.
Well, we call it shore kill. We don't call it the Schuylkill.
It is creepy as can be. And I know the Schuylkill, like not so much from where it meets in Philadelphia. Like I know it like a little bit further west, like in Reading and in these places. And it's just like Reading's a creepy ass place. Yeah. You know, no offense to you Reading folks, but you know more than anyone else how creepy Reading is. And like, what is that river? And then like, I did a whole thing, like this is like decade ago, of where the Schuylkill meets the Delaware, like at that point where the spectrum was.
Yes.
And like the destruction of the spectrum, and like what does spectrum refer to, and spirit, and like and all of that point of land, you know. And you've talked about that.
That's right off where the Philadelphia experiment occurred.
Exactly. Like I've heard you mention that. I just didn't want to like say, oh yeah, I researched that too. But like, yeah, I looked at that. Like there's something with these namings, and understand the Schuylkill is a big deal in my opinion in terms of like natural infrastructure, not like in terms of natural infrastructure, how we move from place to place, but in terms of understanding what, you know, land and water actually is. And this whole, you know, Jesse always likes to talk about this, like, you know, the Philadelphia, the real Pennsylvania wilderness is between these two rivers, the Delaware and the, or as you said it, the Lenapehanna and the Susquehanna, you know, and the Schuylkill cuts through them.
It does. You're right. Interesting, man.
Certainly.
Well, look, I don't know how your time is, man. I know you carved out a slice to seal this up. Did you have any more you wanted to continue building on, or?
No, I think this is good. Like, I think we just dropped a whole bunch of stuff, which I know I want to reflect upon, but I want to come back to this. I'm glad that we've gone here, because I think this is something to keep coming back to as a point of reference for like future investigations, like whether it's here within Pennsylvania. I love what we did with Hood Mystic and what we did in Boulder. I'd like to look at other places on the 40th, but coming back to like the Queen, coming back to like chiefdoms, coming back to like all this sort of stuff, and like and baseball as well.
Yes. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that too, because I wanted to mention the others. I saw in the comments this brother, excuse me for not recalling your name, but you said you got some good information on Cincinnati. I saw some folks from Trenton saying they want to do like a Mystic Trenton. So I wanted to put it out to the folk. Hey, you see what we do? We go to Google Maps, take screenshots, plot places out, take screenshots. We go to locations, we film, we research, pull to get, we've set the template. So do something on your region, hit us up.
Hell yeah.
We'll have you on like with Hood Mystic. That, that's what we want to do, is to decode the different regions we're in,
And let me say this one last thing. So I do stuff like on my own. Like I got my own little group, and there's a guy who is down in DC, and after seeing, and I just know him through my group, and he said he saw the Hood Mystic episode, which we did, and his wife, her family is up in Ohio, and they're coming through Columbus to go visit her. And he was like, yeah, I'm going to go and check out all those sites. I'm like, well, let me put you guys together, because I see that is as important. Like this is the infrastructure. It's like each person, if anything, we're given inspiration. That would be my hope. It's not like we have the answers. Like, look, this is how you can go and look at your neck of the woods. And then when that happens, like the relationship and your understanding of where you are in space-time, and I like to say timing and spacing, because time and space don't exist, but timing and spacing do. And then like it's changing the storyline.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, hey, let's get to work.
All right,
y'all. So give thanks. Thanks, Mike, for your time, man.
Likewise.
I do affirm, like I wanted to ground this. It was so much going on in my mind. I felt we needed to process it and ground it so we can revisit it. Because I know the next time we come together, what we're going to be doing, man, we're not going to be thinking about the new queen and this probably, but it's going to be connected to the 40th parallel and
Yeah.
a whole nother rabbit hole. So before we go down that one, I wanted to seal this up, man. So I appreciate your time,
Thank you for making this happen.
Yeah, man. One mystic to another, bruh. Salute.
Till next time. See you guys.